Well, hello there, and welcome back to episode number 2. I can't believe I'm actually back here doing another episode. That in itself is a massive surprise. I am so excited and so grateful for any of you who have downloaded and listened to the podcast. Um, it just feels weird to me that I'm doing this at all, but I love it. It just feels utterly natural, but most importantly, utterly needed. So it does feel good to be putting something out there that is helping people. Of course it does. And I love getting the messages from people. So keep them coming, keep your questions coming, and keep in touch, because this is a really difficult path for many, many people. And you know what? We can help each other. Why wouldn't we? So I have decided on a name for the podcast, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. I am going to call it Can I Have Your Attention, Please? I know there is another podcast called that in the US, but it's nothing to do with ADHD, and it is very niche in its own right. So I'm going to go for it. I think it's a really good name. It's catchy, and it's exactly what I'm looking for in everything that I do. But with regards to the podcast, the whole idea, and I went over the statistics of this over the weekend. I was, shocked all over again. So just to give you an idea as to why I am doing this, and I think it's really important that I do share this. So there is very little research funding, resources gone into ADHD, particularly adult ADHD. And, I know I've mentioned before, we didn't really get diagnosed. People, our age 40s and 50s didn't get diagnosed when you were back in school in the 70s and 80s. And even if you were lucky enough to get diagnosed, you were more than likely, a white boy, basically, 7, 8, 9-year-old boy. The diagnostic criteria, unfortunately, excuse me, is still very much skewed in that direction. So when you look at the statistics now, there are hugely varying statistics out there. I did a lot of research on all of this, and the most common one that tends to come up time and time again is about a 6.8% percentage of the population that will have ADHD. Now, that is very, very conservative. In many places, that goes up to closer to 20%, particularly across the US, bearing in mind the fact that we don't outgrow this. We tend to just mask or adapt to manage our symptoms. An ADHD brain is always an ADHD brain. It's something you're born with, and it's something you carry through for the rest of your life. So going back to that 6.8%, the other figures that we don't have much research on, but again, there is some research out there to point to the fact that about 1.3% of the population have a diagnosis. So where I'm looking and the people I'm speaking to are those of us who are in that gap. So we are walking around with ADHD with no clue that we have ADHD, and it can have potentially serious effects on our life, on our health, on our relationships, on our jobs, absolutely everything. And in some cases, devastating effects. That's what this is all about. Yes, it's going to be skewed towards adult female, and particularly, menopausal women or women heading into that age, because as estrogen declines, so too does our dopamine. And we're already in a deficit, in a dopamine deficit. So this can have a massive, massive impact and devastating impact on our lives. So I'm trying to raise awareness in that area. That's what it's all about. So just to give you an idea of those figures, in Ireland alone, that's over 272,000 people, the majority of whom will be women, but not all. If you look across to our neighbours in the UK, that brings it up to 4.6 million people. In fact, that's an extra 4.6 million people on top of our 272,000. And if you look across to the US, that's over 24 million. Have I got that right? Yes, 24 million. That's an awful lot of people. In or around 30 million in total if we add them all up. So I'm on episode number 2. Maybe by episode number 3, we'll have 30 million downloads. Would that be good to aim for? Anyway. This is just huge, absolutely huge. And we need to know more about it. There needs to be an awful lot more research. There needs to be an awful lot more funding. There needs to be all of those things that we would love to advocate for. I can't change that overnight. But you know what? By doing this podcast, potentially I can help 1, 2, 3 people pick it up. You might know somebody who is suffering and can't get to the bottom of it. Some of the things that I think are important to share with regards to this are with regards to dopamine deficiently in particular, because as estrogen levels drop, it's dopamine that has one of the biggest effects, if you like, or as estrogen levels drop, dopamine is badly affected. So this is where I want to focus a little bit of attention on the symptoms, if you like, because how does that present itself? Well, you will search for dopamine anywhere you can find it. So what that means is you'll be looking for the novel or the new or something exciting. You might start hobbies and then drop them, or constantly moving from one thing to the next, looking for something that gives you that sort of a rush or a buzz. So it'll present itself differently in all of us because we're all conditioned by our environment and, how we're brought up, our family, how we're living, where we're living, what we're doing at the time. For me, most of the time I search for my dopamine through food. So sugary, carby foods. And that led me to living a life where I was obese most of the time and fighting my weight constantly. In fact, that caused such a massive distraction that my focus went entirely on that. I was either completely dieting or completely binging. There was no in between. And it finally led me to having a gastric bypass in 2022, which then I went on to lose almost 9 stone and have kept it off since. I don't think I would have, well, I know for a fact I wouldn't have kept that off if I hadn't discovered my ADHD diagnosis, if I hadn't realized that's what this was all about. I was treating the wrong thing all along because I was so distracted by my weight and how horrible I felt and the shame I felt. And it was just such a horrible place to be. One of the things that happened as I lost the weight, though, was I started searching for dopamine somewhere else when food was taken away, basically, and was no longer an option after having a bypass. You kind of, have cut that off. I ended up spending and online shopping far, far, far too much. And it was not that I returned most of the things, but it felt weird. I could feel that same level of craving and lack of control is probably how I would call it. And when I cut that off and stopped it, got rid of all the apps on my phone, unsaved all of my payment details on everything, it then turned to alcohol. The cravings came out in alcohol, in that I was looking and feeling about alcohol in a way I never had looked and felt before. And it utterly terrified me. So that dopamine seeking craving is different to other cravings. That's how I would describe it. And again, I'm just describing my own lived experience, but it's not a good feeling. It's an out of control feeling, and it can have devastating consequences. Now, that can absolutely lead to, obviously, addictions and substance abuse, gambling. They all fall under the same. You'll see people talking about, addictions to porn or addictions to sex. All of that falls under the same sort of dopamine seeking, I suppose, deficiency, or it's dopamine seeking drive that is within us. So then if I can just take this to, age 40 onwards, our estrogen and testosterone levels will start to drop. That has a massive impact on the neurotransmitters in the brain. We need estrogen to help our neurotransmitters operate properly. And with lower levels of estrogen comes lower levels of dopamine, unfortunately, which means that your symptoms, and the same with testosterone, your symptoms might be exacerbated. So this might seem to get worse no matter how hard you try to treat it. It actually seems to be getting worse. So if you apply that to, those addictions I've talked about, or where we are substance abuse and, food, eating disorders, it gets worse as we get older. So you can imagine that the devastating effects that can have on the working life, on your relationships, on your family life, on your health, your physical health, and your mental health. And that's why this is incredibly important. Those 30 million people, and I'm just talking about Ireland, the UK, and the US. I just picked those 3 countries and did the figures there. That's 30 million people whose lives could actually have taken a totally different trajectory had they been aware that they had an ADHD disorder. So I guess that's why I'm doing this podcast. And I think it's really important to talk about that. And it's really important to get those figures out there. And it's really important and I haven't made them up. There's research, and I'm going to add the research, add the links to it to show you all of that, where I've gotten all of this information. And then the next step that I want to talk about is getting a diagnosis. So in the previous episode, I did talk a lot about trying to recognize the symptoms and look for the symptoms, and the fact that there are those 18 strong symptoms, and then there is, a further 40, and there's loads and loads of places you can go to find out what those symptoms are, and to talk about, or to read about and do some research about the lesser known symptoms as well. There's so many things since I got my diagnosis, things like having more parking tickets, maybe peers, speeding tickets in particular, maybe having had a few more fender benders than other people, just, driving faster sometimes. For me, my ADHD, so there's 3 types of ADHD. There is your hyperactive, mainly hyperactive, then you have your mainly inattentive or your combined type. Mine is combined, but I'm definitely present more, certainly at the moment, with the hyperactive and impulsivity side of it. And that has been where my issues really came in over the last number of years. And that's what led me to seek a diagnosis. So just to talk about that a little bit, why would you go get a diagnosis? And at this moment in time, it's sort of, it feels as if, and it is, you have to go and prove that you have this. And it's almost like the clinicians are out there to disprove that you have it. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. It's just how it's set up. It's how the diagnostic criteria work. So if you look on the HSE website, to which I'll put a link, and for anyone looking for the links, actually, if you can't find them, there's a little sidebar that says see more. And I think you have to click on that, and they will be below that. So I will put a link to the HSE website that shows you the clinical pathway. So there are 2 ways of going about doing this. You can go private or you can go public. I went private, and I'll talk about that, shortly. But the public way, I just wanted to highlight this because I didn't talk about this much in a video I have. No matter which way you're looking at it in the public system, the very first step is to go to your GP. So this is whether you're an adult with no previous ADHD diagnosis, with suggestive symptoms, or adults with previous diagnosis and maybe severe associated symptoms or impairments. So either way, you need to do that. And the very first thing that will happen when you do that is you'll meet your GP. So this is going to be an interesting one, because if your GP has never had any discussions with you about ADHD in the past, this could go one of 2 ways depending on your GP. So for those lucky people whose GP is very open and ready to listen to what you're talking about and wants to help, which was mine. I was very, very lucky in this instance. They will write a referral letter wherever you want the referral letter to be sent. So if it's down the public route, it will be to the, you'll go to the actual adult mental health. So where they send you straight away to is the ADHD clinic for assessment. So I just want to have a little talk about that. Sorry, just 1 second, I'm opening up. What I thought was a really, really interesting thing on the HSE website, what they talk about. So they have developed a national clinical program. So it is becoming more and more recognised, which is absolutely brilliant. And when you look at this page, ADHD in adults, the national clinical program, the access to adult ADHD services. The adult ADHD clinic provides public services to patients over 18 years of age who are residing within a defined catchment area. So the service is a specialist service providing assessment and treatment of ADHD for adults with moderate to severe ADHD symptoms. So what you're looking at is the moderate to severe ADHD symptoms need to have a functional impairment in 2 or more aspects of your life. So these include problems with family relationships, social relationships, academic or work difficulties, or managing money. So the adult ADHD teams accept referrals for both adult and child community mental health teams. So when you look at this, you can have a look at the link that I put in, and it'll show you up until 2022, there are certain areas where there is services available. And only from the end of 2023, there are 4 more areas coming on board. So have a look at those yourself and you can see. So this is for the public pathway. So just going back to this, that when you go to your GP, and as it states in here, if the GP thinks it is appropriate they can make a referral to the patient's local community adult mental health team. So the community adult mental health team, the very first thing that they will do is work through 2 different types of scales to determine if they feel that you need to go on to the adult ADHD team after that. And they also want to rule out any comorbidities. Now, this can be a difficult area because between both the GP and that team, there are often subcomorbidities. And again, there's a lot of, very new research out there that may not be something that they take on board at the moment, because I know one of the most common things to happen, especially for women, but also for men, is that we get diagnosed with depression as opposed to ADHD. They're often, and actually bipolar is one of the other ones that is often misdiagnosed. There is a lot of overlaps, of course there is, and one can bring on the other. But it shouldn't be, and unfortunately at the moment it is very common that people get diagnosed with depression, and we will obviously take what our doctor says, as written. We place a huge amount of trust in the doctors. And they're only a very recent article in the Irish Times saying number 1 we trust is teachers, and number 2 is doctors. And doctors have a huge amount of vast knowledge that they need to keep on top of. And it's nigh on impossible for one person. There's so many things that they need to treat. So it can be very, very difficult. So what I want to do with this podcast is help you to advocate for yourself as much as possible, which is also going to help your doctor. So I'm going to put a link to 2 different things. One of them is what's known as the ASRS, which is what that clinical team will go through with you. It's the Adult ADHD Self-Report Scale. So I'm going to actually link that, and you can go through that yourself. In fact, if you can print it out and fill it out and bring it to your doctor, that is going to help you get a referral far more than if you simply go in and decide to have a conversation with them. So I'm going to add that to it. The other one I'm going to add to it is basically what's called the WURS, WURS, which is the Wender Utah scale that is also used. So these are the 2 different scales that are used. And there's 25 questions on the Wender Utah, and on the adult self-report scale, I believe there are, let me have a look and see, 18 questions is what I think are on it. I have it open here, so let's have a look and see. And I'll give you some examples. Yeah, it's 18 questions. And what they ask you to think about, this is a self-report scale, so it's a really good one for you to do just to help yourself. But it does only cover, as I said, 18 of those symptoms as opposed to the 40 that we're talking about. But things like the first question, excuse me, how often do you have difficulty getting things in order when you have to do a task that requires organization? I even found that question too long to actually answer. And I often laugh, with all of these questions and forms. They're the worst things you could give to someone with ADHD. And I do believe that, getting a diagnosis, it's because there are so many steps involved. And there are so many things involved that often the ADHD brain will just give up. It's just too much for us. And I understand that entirely. And I guess because I'm on the other side and I've seen the difference that getting a diagnosis and finding the right treatment pathway has made to my life, I want to share this and help you do this as much as I can. So what you're asked to answer is you tick one of 5 boxes. And the first one starts with a 0 for never, a 0 for rarely, then a 1 for sometimes, a 1 for often, and a 1 for very often. And that varies as you go down throughout the questions. But excuse me, other questions, there's examples of how often do you have difficulty keeping your attention when you are doing boring or repetitive work? How often do you feel overly active and compelled to do things like you were driven by a motor? My God, I can relate to that one so much. I'm just going to pick a few other ones. How often do you have difficulty unwinding and relaxing when you have time to yourself? How often do you find yourself talking too much when you're in social situations? Or one of the ones that really jumped out at me, how often do you have difficulty waiting your turn in situations when turn taking is required? How often do you interrupt others when they are busy? Another one is, actually, I don't think it is. Or how often do you find yourself talking too much when you are in social situations? Oh my God, I can relate to so much. I can be very aware of it and doing it, and in my brain screaming, shut up, but I keep talking. Can't stop it. So that is those two. That's the ASRS and the Wender-Utah, the WRS. I'm going to link both of those there. Again, there to help you look at and fill out. If you can print them, fill them out and bring them to your doctor if you're going to go and get a referral from your doctor. So that is if you're going down the public route, but also you may need that referral to go down the private route. So the private route varies hugely depending on where you live, and there are, many very well-known psychiatrists out there with fantastic reputations, but their waiting lists can be 3 years plus or completely closed, which is the case in an awful lot of them. There are newer ones coming on board all of the time, and the difficulty is getting any kind of recommendations about them. So I'm trying to keep on top of that as much as I can. Anyone who's been in touch with me, I have asked them to let me know how they get on with, and this goes for you too, please. If you come across someone you find fantastic and you've had a good experience with, please let me know so that I can share that with others, because there are people out there who really need an urgent diagnosis. And I guess, just going back to those figures that I was talking about at the start, there are women who are, going down the route of getting HRT if they so wish and if they can, because there's many women who can't take HRT, but a lot of them will be undiagnosed ADHD also. So their symptoms will be vastly exacerbated. And the difficulty is you don't know that. How can you compare that? You can be sitting here with a friend, which is what we often do, and we have conversations and we say, oh, this is how I feel. And the other person will go, oh, me too. The difference is, person A is feeling that much, much more, and it's massively impairing their lives, and it's much more often, it's much deeper, it's more frequent, it's much more severe. And the other person is being very kind, but they will have had those experiences as well. They're vastly different. The problem is we use comparison to inform ourselves so much of the time in society that we'll just go, oh, it's just a normal thing, and maybe it's just me not being able to deal with it, and I should be able to deal with it better, or I have a low pain threshold, or I'm not very good with this sort of thing, whatever it might be. So I am here to say, please don't do that. Don't brush yourself off. Don't, I suppose, discount yourself. If it's impairing your life, so if it's affecting your sleep, if it's affecting your mood, if it's affecting your weight, if it's affecting your physical or mental health in any way, keep trying, keep advocating, keep educating yourself, read up on it. People, I have to laugh when I hear people giving out about TikTok. I get it. Like, TikTok is a fun, kind of, even the name doesn't help itself. So many people got their diagnosis as a result of watching something on TikTok that they went, oh my God, I absolutely relate to that. Then brilliant. Anything that is bringing more awareness and education around any topic, then fantastic. I'm all for it. Because if it can help you live the life you deserve to live, then bloody brilliant. One other very serious statistic that I just want to put out there is, if you look up or Google, whatever way, the median age or the average age for suicide in women, it is around 50 years of age. And mental health, ADHD, menopause are so incredibly wrapped up and can have such devastating impacts on people's lives that I suppose that's what's compelling me to do this. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm spending time doing these recordings. It's why I'm getting out there. It's why I'm doing the research, that we really need to help each other. And if we can help someone in some small way, imagine the difference that could make if that was spread and multiplied and multiplied. And that's what this is all about. So please do share, get this out there, send it to your female friends, your male friends, anyone at all that you think might benefit from listening to it. Then I'd be really, really grateful. That would be fabulous. So if you go down the private route, I mentioned that there are lots of them with closed, and I've asked people to get in touch with me with regards to those that have shorter waiting lists, and I have come across quite a few with shorter waiting lists, and I have sent on that information as soon as I get any kind of a good recommendation on them. But all of this, everyone is going to have their own experience. All we can do is, if you are in a position that you need a diagnosis fast, so if it is impairing your mental health, then yes, you do need to get a diagnosis, and fast. So if you are sitting there and you have a year's waiting list ahead of you and you're feeling like crap, I would urge you to go and start looking at other options and other companies, other clinics, other psychiatrists that may have shorter waiting lists, and be open to telemedicine, because online diagnoses are just as valid as those of sitting in front of the person. The only difference is there's a camera between you, or two cameras, I should say, between you. That is the only difference between those diagnoses. And look, I know everyone's different. I suppose COVID, brought us rushing into the world of online meetings and online, everything. So I'm very open to it. A lot of my work is done online, so I'm quite used to it. I'm sitting here behind a camera now, so it doesn't bother me in the slightest. It feels just the same. In fact, it's wonderful. It frees up an awful lot of driving. It's great for the environment. There's a lot of things, a lot of pluses to it. Anyway, so if you can open yourself up to that, you'll open yourself up to an awful lot more people. And you can then, if you feel like you really want to, if you don't get on with that person, you can transfer. That's something that can happen also. But in the meantime, you could be getting yourself onto the path of feeling an awful lot better. Absolutely wait if that's what you want to do. And if it's not impairing your life in such a way that it's urgent, I totally get that. And I'm not telling you to not do that. Please understand. But if it is urgent, if you're feeling awful, and I know the reason I suppose I'm talking about that is I know there are so many of you out there who are feeling like that. And you're the people I'm talking to right now. Please, get in touch. I'll send you any information that I have of any with lower and quicker waiting lists that have had good recommendations. And, obviously it all comes with a caveat. But if it gets you where feeling better and operating better and back to work and back, feeling good in your relationship, the same goes with menopause. I know this is an ADHD podcast, but I had a vastly different experience with GPs, and I ended up having to go private also to get my menopause treatment. Now, I will say that the menopause treatment absolutely helped, not as much as I thought that it would, because I had undiagnosed ADHD. So the menopause treatment helped me with my hot flushes. It helped me get my sleep back in order, and my mood and confidence definitely improved a little. But my impulsivity, hyperactivity was still through the roof. I still felt, I felt absolutely awful. I was incredibly irritable. I had a very low tolerance for anything whatsoever, and constantly felt agitated and a level of anxiety, like I was living in fight or flight all the time. And HRT didn't do anything for any of those symptoms. Only my ADHD medication helped with those. So, the other thing I was is exhausted, constantly exhausted. And I have much more energy level, energy, steady sort of levels of energy throughout the day now, which is all I ever wanted. And it's amazing. And I love it. So that's what I would love for any of you who are feeling how I was feeling. Okay. I hope that all helps. Episode number 2. My God, I don't know if I have just rambled and gone all over the place, but hopefully I've given some information there. If there's anything that you would like to ask or any further information you would like, please do get in touch. I am always delighted to hear from you, and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for listening. And hopefully we'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you. Bye.